Hello, everyone. My name is Jeremy Goldberg. I'm the president, and I'm the quarterback at LeagueApps.
And my name is Brian Litvack. I'm the CEO, co-founder, and first baseman at LeagueApps. Today, we get the pleasure of welcoming you to this event, Next Up, Return to Play. Last November, the LeagueApps team stood on stage in front of many of you, and together with hundreds of sports organizers and leaders of youth sports who had gathered in New York City for the very first youth and local sports industry conference. You came to learn from experts and each other, to find a professional community, and to embrace the power of sports to impact our communities.
We drew upon that same Next Up community over the past 3 months as we navigated one of the most difficult personal and professional situations in our lives, and where we and our communities experienced personal loss and economic hardship. At a time of distancing, we came together for dozens of events to connect online, on Slack, on Zoom, and to support each other. And today we're back together at a time where youth sports is opening up around the country. And this community is re-engaging at a critical time. First, because the community is the authority at such a time of uncertainty. We can learn from experts, we can learn from each other about returning to play safely, protecting our participants and families, and ultimately our coaches and our organization. We can understand how youth and local sports will be different as it adapts to the short term and innovates for the long term. And we can recognize that we're living history as we speak, as we experience a pandemic, an economic recession, and a historic conversation about race, equity, and community in this country, with sports figures in the best tradition of Muhammad Ali and Jackie Robinson helping to lead the way. Sports, and youth sports in particular, have never been more important in bringing people together, building community, and producing leaders.
Now is the time to organize our efforts around a set of beliefs about what youth and local sports should and could look like in the future. Behind me, you'll see a quote that's on our wall in our office in New York City from Nelson Mandela. It talks about sports having the power to change the world. We've talked about this quote at Next Up, and it's been in every single office that LeagueApps team has ever worked in. We believe in certain beliefs that together will make our company, our youth sports community, stronger. We believe that sports is for all, that every child should have the opportunity for amazing sports experiences. We believe in accountability first, that transparency, standards, and safety for all. Some of these beliefs are more important now than they've ever been. We believe that kids rule. We believe that the kids will drive the youth sports experience of the future. We believe in a tech and data revolution, and that everything from the operations to the experience will be impacted by software, data, and technology. We believe that sports organizers are the leaders, that this industry was built from the bottoms up by the people in the community who care most about their communities. And we believe in strength in numbers, that together we can achieve more as a professional community, which we're doing today.
You know, Brian talked about these beliefs, but let's also talk about the reality of what's happening. One of the things that we did at LeagueApps is put together the first youth and local sports survey focused on return to play. And we're releasing an industry report today, and I'll preview that. So let's pull up a slide. And what I wanted to share was, and this is an important conclusion, is that every major trend that we saw prior to COVID-19 has only accelerated. We hit the pause button, but not the reset button. And here's what that means. There were 100,000 youth and local sports organizations, and that number was already shrinking as organizations who can innovate and offer the best experiences were getting bigger. And ultimately, what we see now is there are many organizations that are going to struggle to survive and adapt because of the last 3 months. The second thing we see is the trend of technology and the importance it has to the youth experience is only going to be more pronounced. I mean, how many of us were on Zoom before this whole crisis, right? Whether it's Zoom or virtual training or the way you run your organization and the technology you need, the parent and participant expectations around technology has never been higher. And that's only going to accelerate the demands that all of us are going to face. And last November, the other thing we talked about is the challenge of youth sports participation, that about 60% of people in the youth sports sector aren't playing. The kids aren't playing. And our survey showed that all of us recognize that the challenge of access is only going to increase, whether that's because of costs or access to fields, access to good coaching, whatever it may be. It's a bigger issue. So we have an invitation as a community to be great, to survive and to thrive. Change doesn't happen to you. It happens because of you, because we commit as an industry to a set of core beliefs like Brian described. So the next 3 days are designed to help us be inspired, to educate, to support your efforts to be even better. I want to talk to you a little bit about what today's going to look like. So we're going to be practical here about the return to play and about adapting to new reality. And what we try to do is design every conversation to be focused, to be engaging, and where we can to involve all of you all in the conversation. So we'll talk about health and safety best practices. We'll talk about virtual training and how that's here to stay. We'll also talk about leading organizational change and adaptivity, which is one of the key ingredients for success moving forward. And ultimately, we'll talk about some practical suggestions around insurance, waivers, and liabilities. The other thing that we recognize is that the best part of conferences is when you get to hang out with each other. So we've tried to mimic that as well. And our industry group in Slack will form as like a coffee bar where you can come in there, meet each other, meet with experts, talk, and we'll post a link in the chat tool so you can see how you can get into that. And if you want a little workout, you'll have a chance of doing that today as well with an expert from the Junior MBA, Jeremiah Boswell. It's super fun. You can see virtual training in action. And then the rest of this week, we've got some amazing things lined up. Tomorrow, we're going to hear from the great David Robinson, the Admiral, about the power of sports as a platform for community, and also get his incredible advice, the best advice I've ever heard about dealing with youth sports parents. We'll hear from the commissioner of MLS, which is engaging in youth sports like never before, and youth soccer, Paul Rabel, one of the top athletes in the world who leads the PLL, and other pro league executives about how they're returning to play and ultimately how they're engaging in youth sports and local sports like never before. And on Thursday, we're going to help make sure that LeagueApps partners can understand how to leverage our platform in the return to play. And for those that we don't work with, it'll be an opportunity to introduce yourself to what we're doing and how our ideas and our vision for the future translates into technology today.
Last time, one of the thrills of NextUp was inviting the entire LeagueApps team up to the stage to take a picture together to show the community that we're building and that we're a part of. I also had the chance to take a selfie with Jeremy Goldberg himself on stage, who's such a leader in this event. Unfortunately, we can't do that. I haven't seen most of our team for over 10 weeks. But NextUp Virtual is a hashtag that we're asking you all to use today to be able to share, provide information, and engage in dialogue in all of our digital forums, Twitter, Slack, Instagram, or wherever you may be. So I guess I'll have to take a selfie by myself. Oh, look, it's Jeremy. 6 feet away, according to Dr. Bill Taylor, our new speaker. We have so many great things lined up for you today. Thanks for hanging out with us for that little skit. That's the extent of our production quality. But coming up now, we have two medical experts, Dr. Darian, Sutton, Ramsey, and then we'll have a conversation with Dr. Bill Taylor, who's helped sports return to play in Idaho. We're so excited for all of the events and all the things that we're going to do over the next 3 days. Thank you for being part of this. Thank you for engaging in the sports communities and with our community. There's so much here that we're willing to learn, share, and educate each other together.
Thank you, Brian. So let's get started. And we wanted to start by recognizing the devastation of COVID, the impact it had on so many people listening in, and the serious threat it continues to pose. And one of the things I think it's important for us to acknowledge as we start is the great heroism that we saw during this time, especially from first responders. You know, ultimately, we have to all appreciate that our ability to return to play across this country is because of the selfless efforts of so many doctors and nurses and all the other first responders connected to that. Before his shift today, I was actually able to catch up with one such responder who reminded me of what we've gone through and also the power of sports can have beyond the field and court. And I think it's a great way to start the conversation today. So let's meet Dr. Darian Sutton Ramsey, or Dr. Darian as he's known on Instagram. Dr. Darian worked in the epicenter of the epicenters as an emergency room doctor in Queens. And we'll get that audio fixed up. We'll get the audio turned on. Let's start from the top again. And one of the things as we get started is for Dr. Darian.
You could share that for
there we go.
That understand and have experienced the impact of COVID-19 directly. There's others in parts of the country that may have been less impacted. What has your experience been like over the past couple months? And maybe you could share that for our audience.
Yeah, so it's been a really, really a big roller coaster, as I like to think. at the beginning of this pandemic, when we first started to hear about the cases in January, we were kind of still questioning, number one, how it's going to affect our normal day. And then number two, what will happen if and when it gets here. I think a lot of people who have been around long enough can relate to the SARS outbreak in 2003, I believe. And during that time, we really didn't see that much of an effect here in the United States. And I think a lot of us were having that hope that, oh, this is so physically far away, maybe it will benefit us that we're at a distance. But unfortunately, we've seen how time has played out. If you move in from January all the way into probably early March, I would say, that's when we started to see a real effect inside of the hospital. We had the emergency rooms that were full of patients from wall to wall. Our ICUs were at capacity before the pandemic even started, and now we were making new ICUs out of new units in the hospital, and we were kind of all hands on deck. And then you push a little bit forward into the future from that, into April, and you started to see the effects of the active participation from the community in terms of social distancing, self-isolation when someone thought that they were symptomatic, and precautions like hand washing and surface cleaning. And we saw a significant decrease in the amount of cases. I would have to say it was like a week change, where one day or 1 week, the ER was packed, and then maybe 2 to 3 weeks later, it got significantly decreased in volume. And then we were only dealing with those who were in acute need of help. And so it was really phenomenal, I think, to see the efforts of the people specifically in New York City and all around the United States who took efforts to make personal decisions that really, really helped us in the hospital.
So as we think about the audience that's listening, there are organizations across the country that are starting to return to play and make sports happen around the country. And they're having to think about health and safety as they do that. What advice and perspective would you share with them as they go about that process of starting to kind of bring kids together and give them sports experiences?
So I think it's really important to take awareness of your surroundings. Every single space and location is very different in terms of A, their access to testing, B, the actual prevalence of the disease, and C, the capacity of the hospital if in fact the disease became at a point where it filled up the hospital. I think these things need to be taken into a matter. And I think that when you are developing a plan to organize for a team to be together, you need to really figure out what is the capability of your community. So that's the first thing. And then the next thing I think that people need to do is to make a concrete plan. And so we understand what mechanisms can be put in place to decrease risk of transmission from one person to another. So in terms of things like practice, making sure that everyone is at a specific equal distance, making sure that there is a capable and available amount of supplies for everyone to wash their hands. These things are ritual and normal for me because I work in a space that is constantly exposed to infectious diseases. But I think now we need to translate what I do in the hospital to what you do in the playing field.
So one of the other things as not only you're a first responder and a doctor, but you're also someone whose sports has played an important role of your life. Talk a little bit about your sports experience and what role that it played in your life. And I don't know if there's an experience to you that kind of crystallized, something memorable about your own youth sports experience.
Yeah, so I'm a swimmer by trade. I swam in high school. I swam in the beginning of college as I transitioned into my pre-med major. And then I ended up playing water polo. I think swimming for me was really, really monumental because if anyone who knows who practices swimming, you kind of are in the pool all the time by yourself, finding ways to motivate yourself, to keep yourself going, despite not seeing an end goal. And it's something that I probably use every single day in the hospital in terms of understanding what my goal is and motivating myself to keep that charisma and that drive going. I think that was one of the biggest things I learned from swimming that's really, really helpful.
And any final word of advice from the front lines to people around the country that are getting ready to lead?
Make a plan. That's my whole point. Make a plan and make it easy to understand so that A, you can make everyone feel comfortable who's trying to participate in sports, and then B, everyone understands what they should and should not do. So make a plan, talk to your local healthcare providers, understand what you can do to spread the word, and do your best.
Well, thank you for all that you've done and for inspiring us today. And again, we appreciate all your contributions and helping to keep us safe and the community healthy. And again, for helping us think about this return to play. So Dr. Darian, you can find him on Instagram, Dr.Darian, highly recommend it. Thank you very much for being here today.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks.
was great hearing from Dr. Darian and him giving an opportunity to be with us prior to his shift. And now we're going to engage with this next conversation, really focus on this question of health and safety. And I can't think of a better person to bring into this conversation than Dr. Bill Taylor. One of the things that excites me about the conversation with Dr. Bill Taylor is not only is he the president of the Idaho Youth Soccer Association, an incredible soccer leader in his own right. He coaches the largest club in Idaho, the Boise Timbers and Thorns, but he also happens to be a member of the U.S. Soccer Medical Advisory Committee. And he's the chairman of the U.S. Youth Soccer Organizational Growth Committee, which is made up of thought leaders from U.S. Youth Soccer, MLS, athletes councils, private businesses. So he's got so many different perspectives to share, and he happens to be in a state that was one of the first to return to play. So I'd like to welcome to the conversation Dr. Taylor. Thank you for joining us today. Excellent. We'll get you unmuted. And Dr. Taylor, let me thank you for all that you're doing for soccer and for the community. And I'll start right at it because you've got this unique perspective as someone who loves coaching, who loves playing, but is also a medical professional. And so when you think about the ways that you thought about in Idaho, the return to play and to do that safely, how did you develop the guidelines and approaches to actually make sure that you could return safely?
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. I appreciate the opportunity to address everyone. It's an honor to be amongst the group of people that you have speaking on this platform. And so, yeah, it was, we're all going through this process that's very novel to everyone. And there's no textbook. There's no one that's ever gone through this before. So I think that it was natural that we turned to our national governing bodies as our first layer of decision-making. You turn to your leaders at the top, and then things filter down to your local level. And so for me and our state and my staff, we look to U.S. Soccer. Dr. George Champas is a good friend, and he's the chief medical officer for U.S. Soccer. And I've had many conversations with him. And the medical committee, the advisory committee at U.S. Soccer, put together a very nice return to play document that was very general, but gave good guidelines that everyone under the umbrella of U.S. Soccer was able to go to it, draw from its sources, and then create something more individualistic. So we took a national body's recommendations, various national bodies have come out with their recommendations, and then I applied it to my state level. And we looked at it from a state level, and we said, okay, in our state, we have this unique, our state obviously affected different than New York or New Jersey or Louisiana, right? So everyone, state by state, it's a little different. So we looked at it in our state with our governor, with our local leaders, and we then came up with our action plan from a state perspective. Then really the most important piece is the next step down, and that's at the club level, because that's where the rubber meets the road. And that's where liability takes effect, because now you're dealing with actual players and parents, decision-making processes that are much more complex, and you have to have a very detailed, and like Dr. Darian said in your last conversation, the most important thing we looked at as we created this plan as a club was to make it simple, easy for parents and players to understand, and we don't need to overthink things. We just needed to do a lot of common sense things like the social distancing, the washing of our hands. We put in practice, how you come to practice, a line of where you go and how you enter into the practice field, not having parents and extra people there. The coaches had very set protocols on how we run practices. So very granular, spraying the kids' hands with hand sanitizer before and after training. Don't touch the balls, and just no one touches the cones except the coach. Just a lot of granular things that we put in practice and communicated with our coaching staffs. And that way that it gave confidence, it bred confidence to the parents that their kids were coming to a safe environment, and the kids could have confidence they could be with their friends again and reintroduce real life back at a meaningful rate that was, I think, healthy.
So when I hear you describe that return to play, it seems like there's a couple of different components to this. One is the protocols that you're using around safety and distancing, and the second is probably maybe modifying practices or games the way you were doing things. So what did soccer look like as you were coming back? What were some of the modifications, and how did that work, and how did that maybe change over time?
So the various phases that we have, we started off obviously like everyone I think in the country was on phase 0 or phase 1, depending on how you look at it. So we'll just call it phase 1, which was a shelter in place kind of thing. It was virtual training. It was training in your backyard. It was Zoom conference calls with your team. and coming up with unique ways to individually make yourself better and keep engaged in the sport. So once we kind of exited, and everyone's exiting, most people are kind of exiting that phase at this point. We're a couple phases down, but in Idaho. But the next phase down was going back to training in person, right? So that phase one was lasted for 2 weeks, and we in that phase, you're 6 feet apart, you're doing passing drills, and you're doing things that aren't contact related, but it allows you to have that socialism with certain protocols in place. And we trained in recommendations were no greater than groups of 9 players to 1 coach ratio, with dedicated spaces that we had, so you weren't crossing over with other groups. And it worked really well. It was very successful. We didn't have any complications. There were no sicknesses or any spike in anything. Anyone that reported any kind of sickness, we didn't care what the sickness was. We had to get medical clearance. We also had all the players and parents signed a hold harmless document that also then helped the club with their liability, et cetera. So I think that was important. And that was from the state side. We gave that to all the clubs to implement. And then the next stage is with the stage that we're in right now in Idaho, and we're getting ready to exit to the in a week from now to the next stage. But in this phase, there's a little more team interaction. The size of the group can go up to 25 in the space that we have, and the same protocols of washing your hands and doing all of those kinds of things are in place from the previous phases, but we've just increased the size of the groups. And now we're getting into more tactical training. So shadow play, playing between lines. So there's implied pressure per se in the game, but not full pressure. That's a little difficult from a coaching perspective for those of you that coach. That's easier said than done when you're dealing with 18-year-old kids in my case. That don't feel that there's as much risk to them. You got to kind of always have, as a coach, you kind of have to lead that. But then in the next phase that we go to, we'll start playing games. So in another week from now, we'll actually be playing scrimmages in the club, and we're not traveling to tournaments yet, right? So that'll be probably next month. In the last phase, we'll be fully open and return to full play and no restrictions. So all of these things are being done at variable stages, even within my state. Up north in Idaho, for example, they've already been playing games. They're ahead because their local government and are a little bit more advanced, and they didn't have much impact there. In Boise, where I live, we're still, parks and recs haven't fully opened to full play yet. And so that'll happen in a couple of weeks. And then we'll be following the guidelines of the local government as well.
Well, as I ask you more questions, one thing I'll mention is the Q&A tab on the right-hand side of the Zoom. If you have questions, feel free to ask them or look at the questions in there and upvote them so I can pose the best ones to Dr. Taylor. As you kind of came back, were parents resistance to this? Were they appreciative of the protocols? Like, how did you like youth sport parents are always complicated. Now you're introducing a whole different safety dynamic. Were you feeling pressure with them to go faster? Were they more conservative? And what was the way that you earned their confidence to design this program in a way that brought them along?
I think, I'm a little bit different in the setting because of my background. So I think because I'm a physician, maybe if I wasn't a physician, I was, had a different job and was a coach, a parent coach or something, there might not be that level of trust and understanding. But I haven't had any pushback from anyone, and everyone's been right on board with what we're doing. And I think it translates to our club as well. But with that being said, I've been very sensitive to there have been a couple parents that their kids haven't come to training because maybe they have like an older grandparent living with them or something like that. And so their family, that's where I said the rubber meets the road at a family and individual level. And as coaches, I think the most important things, we have to be very sensitive to the various acceptance to when those kids come to return to play, and that there's not a stigma like, oh, Johnny or someone else isn't at practice, and they're weak because they didn't come, or, you know what I'm saying? There can be a stigma that sometimes kids can do. So I try and make sure that everyone recognizes like, this is a personal decision, and it's okay to not be at practice if you don't feel comfortable being there. It's okay if you're trying to take it slower, and up for other players that are more open to it and aren't worried about it, don't have anxiety about it, then I want them to be able to experience the as much playing and joy of the game as they can. So I think we've done a good job with it, and the parents haven't really pushed back, and I haven't had any negative experiences to this point. I think the country in general, and I have talked to many other coaches around the country, and that's kind of been the feel I've gotten from numerous coaches from around the country, that there is a general feel of like, it's okay, we're all coming back to this together, and as long as we're communicating, it's okay.
And have you found, I know one of the questions from Brian Irving was about whether there's changes to rules or gameplay in order to return to play for soccer. Have there been those kind of modifications, or as you look ahead to this next phase with some gameplay?
Yeah, I think, well, for us, going back on the youth side of gameplay, obviously we know on the professional side, they've changed some rules of substitution rules. They have 5 subs like in the Bundesliga and some of those kind of rule changes. But on the youth side of it, as we come back into actual games, which will start in the next 2 to 3 weeks, as a state, as we administer those games, we have certain protocols that we put in place as far as the number of fans, the distance on the sidelines. So we're requesting in the early first 2 weeks that only 2 members of any family attend, that there's social distancing on the sidelines. Players aren't going to, there's not going to be pre and post, shaking hands kind of stuff. And we're actually going to have the kids jog across the field and clap for the other parents and players, as a sportsmanship kind of thing. Actually, I think there's an opportunity we have, in every disaster, you have opportunities to make it a positive. And I think this is a great opportunity for us as coaches to be able to spin this into a positive as far as sportsmanship. The competition seems, we're very competitive as a country, and there's no one more competitive than myself. I hate to lose. But with that being said, I also feel like it's an opportunity for me as a coach to embrace the sportsmanship side of it, because we're in this, coming out of this together. In reality, the guys that are across the field from me that we're competing against, we're all brothers or girls' side sisters, right? I mean, we're a family, and we're a soccer family, and we just are embracing the opportunity to get back on the field and enjoy a part of life, right? And I think that gives hope. It breeds a lot of hope to the future, and that to me is what return to play is all about. It's not so much about the competition as it is about the unity, the sportsmanship, and these other factors that we can breed in.
Yeah, it creates such a great foundation that, to build upon, right? Because the competition will eventually be there, but reminding us in the absence of it, what we miss most about sports, which is just the opportunity to play and the camaraderie that comes with that. In terms of, was there testing that you did beforehand, or temperature checks, or required testing? Like, how did that play into the way you thought about it, or even as you've been part of some of the conversations on in terms of national guidelines for soccer?
Yeah, testing is a very complex discussion. As you can tell, there's so much confusion in the marketplace because of testing. And from a medical professional point of view, I can tell you that testing holds its value in the setting of, like, if you're a medical professional working in a hospital setting, where if you are infected, you could really kill people. And it holds a strong correlation for certain fields of certain professions where first responders, et cetera, that really testing is quite vital. I think at this stage, testing the general population as a whole is very difficult, because one day, so you're going to test every day, right? So, you could be positive, you could be negative today, but you go to the grocery store or something and you can be positive. So at what point is the testing valid? So I think that, having the testing done in certain situations when you get sick or have symptoms, or if you're someone at risk, if you're an elderly person or have underlying condition that will put you at high risk, where early treatment could have a positive effect, I think that's where testing. But as far as kids going back to return to play, I don't see that as holding a role. I do think temperature checks at home, we'd have the kids check their own temperatures prior to, but we don't check them at the fields as coaches. And
I got you.
Yeah,
what about mask wearing? Are you asking kids to wear masks, or parents or coaches? How does that come in?
No, we haven't had anyone wearing masks at the training. If they want to wear it, we've left it up to the parents and players as they come to practice and leave training, if they want to wear the masks. That's a personal bias. But during training, I personally feel like, especially when we're doing conditioning and things like that, that could be a harm to the kids for oxygen and doing that. And we already know from scientific data, that the risk outdoors is actually much better. The free open air is a much better situation than if you're in a tight, if we were playing inside in the gym or something tighter quarters where the circulation of oxygen is different. So no, the long answer to that is no, we haven't required masks.
Right. And in terms of a protocol, if someone on one of your teams tested positive, or someone in their family did, how have you thought about designing an approach there, and what implications that has about the return to play?
Well, that's a good question, because I had a player, I'm training right now, and I had a player text me yesterday and said, "Coach, I've got a cold. I'm not feeling really good." I said, "You know what? We're going to need to make sure you get medical clearance before you come back. Normally, obviously, you wouldn't, but we have a protocol. They have to have 3 days after they can return to play when they have no fever for at least 3 days." And or if it's been 10 days from the start of their symptoms to the end. So it's kind of a little bit of a self-quarantine kind of process, or they could go and get tested if they go to their family doc and get tested, and we get medical clearance. But we want to make sure we have some sort of clearance prior to them returning onto the field, potentially exposing others.
And one of the other questions that is coming in around ultimately the use of equipment, and in soccer maybe a little bit different as you're playing with your feet, but how did you think about protocols around the sharing of equipment, especially with an audience that's national today that's listening to you? And they were mentioning, for example, smaller leagues or maybe leagues with special need athletes where equipment might be shared. What is the best protocols, or how do you think about the protocols associated with that?
Yeah, right now, like for example, simple things that you usually, in our sport and in many sports, you use pennies, for example. I haven't been using pennies through these various stages until we go back to full open play. So I have the players wear different light color shirts, for example. So I'll assign, you wear light color today, you wear your darker color. So half the squad is in one color and half the other, so we can do some unique things there. But for pennies and then cones, I'm the only one that moves and touches the cones. In the earlier phase, we didn't allow anyone to touch the balls with their hands. It was all feet, right? Goalkeepers are now being instituted in phase 3. We weren't shooting on goal for the first phase and the second phase, but now in phase 3, goals are being utilized to shoot on goal. So goalkeepers can use their hands, obviously, and they have gloves on. And so the main thing is that I emphasize to my players, because humans are humans and they're going to do things. So I tell them, like during practice, to really remind them, don't touch your face, don't touch your mouth or nose or your eyes. And I make sure that I spray their hands probably 3 times during practice. So anytime we take a water break, I have a sprayer that I walk around, and they hold their hands out and I just spray in their hands. They wipe their hands, and that I think mitigates a lot of risk. That's
great. Final question to you is as you have a national audience, and Idaho may be on the earliest edge, even parts of Idaho further ahead in terms of the return to play. What advice would you give out there to all the youth and local sports leaders that are gearing up for this, or maybe haven't quite started? What should they know? What have you learned and experienced as you've gone through this, and that you would share with them?
Yeah, that's a great broad question. I think the one thing that, from a physician point of view, that I look at this, and I think that more of a holistic view is that we have this pandemic that's going on, and the virus is not going away anytime soon. There is risk stratification that occurs in every one of our lives every day, where we have to assess, whether we get in our car or not, and how we manage and take on different levels of risk. Each of us are unique with our own health issues, et cetera, and we have to look at the situation and go, okay, the virus is going to be in the background, number one, and that our whole goal with all of the sheltering and doing all the things we're never going to get rid of the virus. It was just to make sure our medical system wasn't going to be overrun. So we're entering into this transition phase with how do we live with the virus, basically, and how do we mitigate at the same time as not isolate, because I've seen on the opposite side the health risks of of not being active, of the mental strains. I've had a couple players that developed severe anxiety where I've had to help them go into some therapy because of college, and they're not, just all kinds of things. These young players that adults, we have our professions, and these kids that are coming out of high school, trying to transition into college, not even knowing if they can get into their college team now, not even knowing if college is going to happen. There's all these anxiety things that have come up. And I think that we have a role as sports coaches. We integrate with these players at such a granular level. We have a way of helping them overcome these fears, helping them to transition into normalcy and recognize that, look, you're as an individual, these players are at the lowest risk of the spectrum, right? So I think we can help enforce that and help them recognize what your personal risk is, what your family's risk is, and then make decisions based on that. And I think if we have a realistic approach to this, and not one based on fear, but one based on data and knowledge, and then we'll all come out of this really healthy. And I think in the future, be able to attack this in a much more efficient way. We're going to be much smarter on the next go around, I can tell you that.
Well, Dr. Taylor, I can't thank you enough for not only the medical advice, but your leadership within youth sports. It's recognized and appreciated. We're overwhelmed by questions of people who wanted to throw those ideas out. So we'll invite you into that industry Slack group, and you could share some of those ideas, answer questions. We'll follow up with you. But thank you for being with us as we turn to the next topic. Appreciate everything. Stay well, and keep us posted how things go in Idaho.
Appreciate it.
So as we think about what's next, and we get to welcome Eric Fisher back into the conversation, one of the things I'll point out is and one thing I'll say is, if your questions weren't answered, we're gonna make sure we save those and put those into that industry Slack group. The other thing I'll say is that if you want to get a sense of guidelines across different sports, we'll post a great resource in the chat tool from the Play Sports Coalition, which we'll talk about later, that I happen to be the co-chair of, that put together a great document for return to play considerations that aggregates all of the return to play considerations from governing bodies and associations, from the CDC, Aspen Institute. So take a look at that as a document. So we just heard a great conversation about returning to play and health and safety. And one of the realities, it's been amazing how organizations have adapted. In an industry report that's releasing today, one of the things we saw is more than half of organizations have launched some kind of virtual training, and another 15% plan to do so. And this is just not a temporary feature. I think, as we'll hear about, this is something that I think will be a permanent part of the youth sports landscape, and the kind of innovation and technology will be part of it. So I'm excited to welcome in Eric Fisher. Eric, I don't give up the mic very often, but I have a lot of faith and confidence in you, and so much respect for all that you've done professionally and your leadership within sports business and journalism. So I'll turn it over to you for a conversation with Yael and Rich, and let you take it away. Thanks so much, Rich. Thanks so much, Eric.
Well, great. Thanks. And thanks for getting this kicked off here. Really excited to take the next half hour or so to really get a little deeper in the weeds on some of this video coaching, digital instruction, so forth, and a lot of the development efforts happening in and around that. And we've got Rich Abend from Famer and Yael Averbuch from Techne to help us go through this conversation here. And I guess maybe just a real good general place to start is, you guys have been in this world already. You were before the pandemic started. But if you could just sort of describe both qualitatively and quantitatively the last 3 months, what that activity on your platforms has been like. I'm assuming certainly there's been a increase in volume, but beyond that, how would you describe the last 90 days or so?
Great. Yael, you can go first.
Oh, okay. Okay, thanks, Rich. Yeah, so Techne Football is purely a soccer resource, and prior to this time, the purpose of the app is to guide individuals in all the things that they can do on their own with minimal space and equipment. And so we work with individuals who sign up to use the app, as well as with teams and clubs, to make that individual training part of the culture of what they offer and part of the soccer experience within their group. So prior to this, we were already working with a number of teams and clubs and individuals to talk about individual training and the importance of it within the soccer landscape. And then, leading into a March when everything really shut down, we all of a sudden had a massive influx of interest, I think, from both people who already knew and valued the resource, but kind of hadn't moved forward on it. And this was the catalyst that they said, you know what, now we need to do this. And then also people who maybe weren't considering doing anything like this or didn't see the value in individual training, that all of a sudden we're like, okay, now this is all we can offer. So really in terms of, I mean, we had at one point our usage, I think within a day spiked like upwards of 30 times. And so we saw, you know, some huge spikes, and now are, I think, coming to the point where we're having the conversations of, okay, individual training is not pandemic training, which we've had some coaches and some clubs actually say to us, is that, oh, we just wanted this for pandemic training. And so we say, well, you know what, no, we were working with teams and clubs and individuals prior to this, and we would hope to work with you after, because this is something that players need to be doing all the time, not just in lieu of their group training. So I think, you know, we've seen certainly increased interest, increased usage, but also it sparked a lot of conversation surrounding the role of individual training within team sports and how that should play a part, not only through this time, but beyond.
Rich, how about you?
Yeah, so first, thanks, Eric. Thanks, LeagueApps, Brian and Jeremy. You guys have been incredible leaders throughout this time, not just for LeagueApps and their customers, but for the entire industry. So we applaud you. Yeah, so to kind of mirror what Yael said, you know, again, Famer is a sports coaching and mentorship platform that enables group, team, and personal and individual training programs and simple interactive feedback between the coaches, clubs, and organizations. So similar, right, that we were here before, right, COVID, and we always saw Famer never to take the place of what happens on the fields and on the courts, right? You can't take the place of
It's just not working.
I think we might be having some technical difficulties there.
Rich, it appears we can't hear you. Why don't we troubleshoot that? He maybe can't hear us either. So Eric and Yael, why don't you guys continue the conversation? We'll work on this with Rich in the background.
Sure. Apologies on the technical issues here.
Can you guys hear me again?
Oh, Rich, are you there?
Yeah, I'm back. I don't know where I left off. It keeps shutting me down, but I just wasn't paying attention because I was riffing. So to finish the thought, the behavior that, you know, or that people like Techne and Famer really wanted to create and develop has really been developed over the last 3 months. So coaches, clubs, athletes, and parents are now used to using mobile and digital training platforms like ours. So it's really advanced, I think, that the way that people are going to use this. And, you know, more importantly, now mom and dad are comfortable, right, to Yael's point, not just as a replacement, but really as an extension enhancement to what happens on the fields and courts. So now they're seeing this as something that they see, yes, today as a replacement, in the short-term future as a sort of a backup, but really this is here to stay and part of the long-term future, I think, of the way sports and activities are run.
So outside of sports over these last handful of months, and particularly in the educational space, you know, there's been all sorts of stories from teachers and parents and so forth about burnout and repetitiveness and kids being bored and so forth. How have you sort of been able to manage your programming to sort of fight off that and keep that engagement level, not just the raw numbers, but qualitatively keep that engagement up and prevent kids from getting bored doing the same drills over and over and those kinds of things?
Yeah, I can go first this time.
Go ahead, yeah, thanks.
So, you know, for us, a big part of the way that our Famer platform is built is really based off of two-way communication, two-way video sharing. There's accountability, it's personalized, it's customized. So you're getting content and you're getting programming and you're getting skills, drills, moves, or whatever it is that the coach, club, and organization is trying to bring, you're getting it in a very personalized and customized fashion. So the kids are expected to show you their work, right? Just like we see in school, right? Teachers are requiring, hey, let me see your homework. Let me see, obviously, how you did on the test. We think the same rules apply, but it allows your coach, your club, your organization, your trainer to continue that two-way engagement, which really keeps kids on track. I know for me, personally, I saw my son go from zero motivation or incentive because he's motivated and incented by virtue of competition and socialization. And he wasn't getting either of that in the way that it was being created. He connected with a coach on Famer, right, through his club and organization. And he started, who's a LeagueApps customer, Level Up. He started to work directly with that coach. And every 2-3 days, he got new workouts in that he needed to complete. He needed to show that coach and organization. And it creates such a better experience. On Famer's platform, there's telestration, there's voiceover, there's text. So when you know as a kid that you're accountable to that coach or organization that you belong to, you typically care more, it's more social, it's more accountable, and obviously everybody wants to look good for their coach or club.
Yael, how about you in terms of the engagement strategy?
Yeah, and I think, Rich made some really good points having to do with, I think, the things that keep players of all ages and levels motivated. And one piece of it is the accountability. And the other piece that can be done through technology and at Techne is always focused on is building community, so that while you're on your own training, you don't feel isolated. And I think sometimes that's where the feeling of burnout can come from. You're on your own, you're kind of doing this repetitive work. Well, what can connect you back with other people doing the same work? Maybe to see videos of how other people look or pro players look while they're doing it, to be able to interact with your coaches. And so our platform has some things to forge that community, such as competitive leaderboards. So, we keep our kids, all of the players using the app are competing against one another, whether it's within their team or their club or the Techne community as a whole. We've also worked very closely with a lot of coaches to provide tips and suggestions based on how they can talk about individual training to their players. And I think, while technology can do a lot and remote training can be done, all on your own, there is an aspect of the motivation that is best done with a coach or mentor. And I think, this is what Rich was saying with Famer, they do a really great job of allowing that for that interaction. Through Techne, we really encourage our players to be completely self-sufficient. So through this time, it's been an interesting conversation with us to talk to these coaches and say, how can you speak to your players about what they're doing on their own and get their feedback and have that interaction in a way that's going to keep them motivated day in and day out, week over week? Because, it's been a long period of time on their own, whereas usually they're doing bits and pieces in between team sessions. Right now, this is what they're doing every day. So we have features like our training streak and the leaderboards that keep players accountable, make it competitive, as well as encourage the consistency and allow them to build that feeling of habit. And I think when things become habit, you look forward to getting your daily training done, and it's, part of what you do every single day. So these are all the things that we work on through our technology, but also through conversations with the coaches using it.
So we've got a interesting question coming in from the audience about sort of the hours and sort of the overall volume in terms of coaches being able to be with the students and sort of a net increase through this virtual instruction. What are you seeing along those lines? And are you actually seeing sort of a net increase in terms of the development of your users based on that overall aggregate increase?
Go ahead, yeah.
Rich, do you want to? You could. Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, these last 3 months, we've seen a huge increase in the number of, especially I would say, teams and clubs. And I think it's been a really important thing for clubs to be able to, especially youth clubs, to offer their membership, not just the players, but also the coaches. A lot of clubs have professional coaches who they're paying through this time and looking for ways to help them to engage with the players. So whether it's through Zoom meetings and a lot of creative things, and I have to, give a huge shout out to all of the coaches out there who have gotten extremely creative through this time and really put in so much work to continue to engage with the players through all kinds of tools, whether it's social media, and I've seen coaches getting on TikTok and things that they never did before, through Zoom. And with Techne, what we've really done is we've seen a huge increase in the number of coaches who are looking to use this tool with their players. I think that's been by far the biggest growth that we've seen. Literally hundreds of clubs and teams from around the country now looking to implement the resource as part of what they do. So certainly this has been a time when people are looking for something like this.
Yeah, and on our side, the way our platform works, it's asynchronous, meaning like we work in collaboration with tools like Zoom, right? it'll be interesting to see kind of where does the Zoom fit in once the kids are back on the field at 25%, 50%, 100% capacity. My guess is it will go away in a lot of cases, and you'll take that Zoom library and redistribute it if practice is canceled, or use it, through platforms like ours. But we're asynchronous, meaning it's not, you do that work on your time, right? It's assigned to you, just like homework, right? We call it the play work, but you're actually doing it on your own time when you have time to, focus on yourselves. The other thing that, is undoubted is that kids aren't getting the personal attention they need on the courts and the fields. So to be able to work on your own game in your own time, and not just the team concepts or the things that are happening, on the fields and on the courts, but things that help, with executive function that make you a better person, and things that help you think the game better, whether it's mental health or fitness, or, working through, things like game concepts or cognitive development. So we see this being layered in over time. Not all clubs, not all coaches are going to start there, but that's really where we think this goes. It could start with just basic skills, drills, and like concepts and moves and things that will help you get better at the sport that you're training for. But it goes well beyond that, we think, in the future.
So the data that Jeremy showed at the beginning showed increases across a number of different sports, sort of both in and out of season. But Rich, since you deal with a lot of different sports, are there any sort of particular differences that you've seen in terms of consumption patterns or usage patterns in one sport versus another?
Engagement is way up. And if you think about, right, obviously where we live has, sort of, it's very different on how the pandemic has kind of impacted, like, your space, right? A New York City apartment, right? We work with a group called Wellness in the Schools. We're actually creating fitness and programming for kids that are probably stuck in a small bedroom in a New York City apartment or in a hallway, right? We've seen sports like basketball and lacrosse and soccer just really be strong for us, because kids can go find either a piece of concrete or a patch of grass, whether they have a driveway or a backyard or not, and they're able to work on their, his or her game. So part of the way we thought about it, we have a partnership with the NBPA called Training Ground, and we launched it 2 weeks ago, and it's a free platform, it's free content, and it's all meant to allow kids anywhere in the world to get this incredible training from the best athletes and the best trainers in the world. But the way we layered in the content was knowing that you might be stuck at home a couple of weeks ago. Now you're starting to get outside, and there's some things that you want to do in the house. And now you can start to get outside a little bit more. And then even content around the mental health side, knowing that, kids are dealing with unprecedented times. They're doing things in a way that they never have before. And again, as a father of 2 children, I see the ups and downs of the mental side of it. So I think adjusting and being flexible with the content and programming is a key piece of this. But we've seen it across many sports, but basketball, lacrosse, and soccer have been really strong on the engagement side for us. And I think because that's where we have most of our customers, and really where the coaches have been just the most engaged. It all comes back down to the coach engagement.
So now looking now to the other side, as we start to emerge on the other side from some of the shelter at home restrictions and try to get to the other side of the pandemic here, particularly in these sort of earlier emerging states, what have been some of those usage patterns, and what is sort of the integration strategy as we get to an actual back to a state of play type of situation?
Yeah, I could start this time, Yael. So we're taking turns. It's going well. So yeah, first and foremost, I think Doctor mentioned it a little bit before, that depending on where you live, depending on the sport that you play, right? My son's a basketball player. It's going to be much slower to the take than some other sports like soccer, football, where you're not physically touching the ball, even though it obviously is physical. And it depends on where you live. So what's going to happen is, some places are going to start with 25% and split fields. Some places are going to start, get to 50%. So it might take some time to really get back on the courts and fields the way that we were accustomed to. So in the meantime, right, whether practice is canceled because we're, adjusting to a pandemic, or because of weather or whatever it is, you can still get your work in, right? You're still assigning the kids. This is the things that we're working on. This is what's going to keep you on track. And kids who are developmenting in sports, you want to create the right practice habits, the right, keep them on track coming from the club and the organization. So this continues the communication, continues the mentorship, keeps them training and on track. Again, whether practice or sports is canceled postponed, coming back halfway, or even when we're obviously back at full strength, which we all hope happens as soon as possible.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what Rich mentioned about creating the habits is really key. And this is something that at Techne and Famer we were doing prior to this time. And so our hope and our communication with everybody now is, okay, well, let's talk about all of the wonderful creative and disciplined habits that players were forced to form during this time, and how those can translate back into some combination of practice. And like Rich said, everywhere is going to be different in terms of how the return to play functions, and also what players will be allowed to do. So players may be allowed to train in small groups and still kind of stay distant. So it's going to look different for everyone moving forward. But quite certainly, I think it comes down to the communication and the framing of where this individual training fits in the context of the sport. And I know for soccer, every top player who's ever been interviewed always talks about the time as a kid that they hit the ball against the wall, or that they were doing things on their own, the time they stayed after training to do the extra. And so it's so important in our soccer landscape, especially, and I think this is the case with many youth sports, is that the kids are used to it all being set up for them. They get dropped off at their team practice 2 to 3 times a week. They have their game on the weekend. And I think this was a stark awakening for a lot of players to even start to contemplate the things that they can be doing on their own in their small bedroom, in their hallway, in the little patch of grass, as Rich mentioned. And so they've now got this thought process, and it's our job, I think, to help and to work with their coaches to help to translate for them how this looks when they're back with their team play. This should be a part of every young athlete sport experience, I think, not just to develop the skills, but because it instills so much confidence. It's about learning the discipline. It's about learning the commitment and creating that individual relationship with the sport and the game that you don't get when you're simply just dropped off at things and it's all set up for you. So it's so important that it's framed for the players as something that they develop now, that they can continue, and how they should continue it in the framework of their group sessions once those start back up.
So I want to shift gears a little bit to more of a financial realm here. Over the last couple of years, we've seen the venture capital community, really get very interested in sports writ large, and certainly digital sports more specifically. How do you see that sort of playing out in your respective worlds? And more specifically, how do you see this potentially impacting or accelerating your respective product development or product development within the youth sports space?
Go ahead, Yael.
Yeah, I'll start off so we can keep alternating. What's interesting is that I feel that the conversation, Techne launched in October of 2016, so we're coming up on being 4 years old, and the conversation initially was it was kind of a novel idea. Like, well, we'll see where this goes. And a lot of my conversations with people were like, oh, okay, that's an interesting thing. Never thought of that. And obviously, over time, we've had, great success with the people who use it. We have wonderful feedback, but still the conversation was more of explaining how virtual training can fit into the landscape. And I think what this time has certainly done is it's shown the place that virtual training has in the sports landscape. And so now a lot of the interest in the conversations are going the other way. We've had a lot of people reaching out and talking about learning more and wanting to form partnerships and things like that, because now I think this time has made the need for virtual training speak for itself. And this was something that was going to happen eventually. I think it was going to be probably a slower spiral than obviously what was sparked through the absolute need for it. But there's an appreciation now and an understanding of how this fits in that I think was going to take some time to happen otherwise. And I'm curious to see if Rich is feeling on if that's been similar for Famer.
Yeah, I mean, so distance learning and mobile coaching has obviously exploded. It's become sort of a hot button across many different industries as we've seen. Mobile coaching and distance learning and this type of programming is here to stay. There's no doubt about it. When you think about the fact that over the last 3 months, it's kind of forced clubs, coaches, athletes, parents to adopt a new behavior and engage in a different way that is obviously going to help companies like ours, but it's also a behavior that like we were obviously trying to advance well before this happened. And clubs and organizations, like, again, I always joke because I come from a family of coaches, so anybody who's a coach, don't take offense, but coaches aren't the most advanced, technological people. So when all of a sudden you're giving them like this new thing, it's like, whoa. And what they've done is no short of incredible, because yes, part of it was a need that they needed to earn a living, and part of it was a need to drive engagement, to keep connection with their athletes, because that's who they are inside, and that's really, really important. So being able to continue to do that, and all of a sudden have all these coaches and clubs figuring out how to shoot content, upload content, create programming, do live Zooming, has really, really been incredible. Now, the other side of that fence is there's a lot of what I call white noise out there, meaning, you can't open up your personal email, without seeing 50 skills, drills, workouts, things that are coming from everybody, which is incredible, because organizations and businesses are trying to be there for kids and athletes around the world, which is awesome, right? But I think now that mom and dad are more comfortable paying for this, again, not as a replacement forever, it's part of, not just as a backup, but as an extension and enhancement. So that I think the market has gotten much bigger, the behavior has gotten much more advanced, and then obviously the VC community is more interested because they see the potential of where this can go. For us, it still comes back down to the personalization, the customization of getting better. Whatever your better is, whether you try to make the starting team, get into college, or just do it for socialization purposes, this is going to help every kid in their driveway, backyard, wherever that they perform, giving them all the tools that they need to go get better if it's important to them and if they're interested in it. And I think that is the most exciting part. So from a financial standpoint, mom and dad are more comfortable, clubs and coaches are more comfortable paying and issuing this, and then ultimately the market just got much bigger, which should be exciting not only for us, but for many companies that participate in the space.
Well, I think that's going to be a great place to leave it here. I'm fortunately going to have to cut it short at that point to stay on schedule, but I want to thank you both for a really fascinating conversation, and a lot more to come in this space. And again, thanks a lot. And I'm going to turn it back over to Jeremy.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Thank you, Yael. Thank you, Rich. You guys were terrific, and appreciate you inspiring us. So here's the plan. We are going to go to a break, but we're going to keep you busy as part of that. And so there's a couple different ways as you stretch your legs to kind of catch your breath before we have an incredible afternoon session. First is, if you don't want to see what virtual training is like and how it's something that's good, whether the most competitive athletes, the most social athletes, check out at LeagueApps on our Instagram handle. You'll see the junior NBA, Jeremiah Boswell, will join with one of LeagueApps' own, Casey Miller, to do a virtual workout. It's going to be awesome. Jeremiah did this for the NBA conference the other week, and it was awesome. The other thing is our Slack group. You can go in there. You'll find Rich doing a virtual Q&A. You can also treat it as a virtual coffee break or lunch break. You can meet other participants. So that link explains how to get involved. Again, you can see that Slack link and have a chance. The next session will start at 1:30. It's going to be amazing. We'll start off with Scott O'Neill, who's the president of the 76ers and the Devils, one of the top leaders in sports. And one of the top innovators in sports, along with Dave Elliott, who's the CEO of Augusta Sportswear, talking a lot about how to run your organization and lead through change, and then talk about liability and waivers and insurance in the afternoon after that. And that's at 1:30 p.m. If you need any help, the virtual help desk here will be at LeagueApps.com, that chat tool. Go ahead and post any questions you have. Let us know. You should have the Zoom link and a calendar invite. Again, if you need help, just go to LeagueApps.com and the chat tool or our Slack group. Enjoy the break, get a workout in, check out Slack, meet some other people. We'll see you back here at 1:30 on that next Zoom link. Have a great day, everyone.